Part 76. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 753. The little bear hugged his mother's leg and wept very sadly. While crying, he shouted, "Daddy lied to me, he lied to me. Bad guy, big bad guy." Unicorn looked at him blankly. Mu Yangling hurriedly smiled apologetically at Duquan, asked someone to send him out, and hugged the little bear to coax him, but when the little bear was crying, he didn't listen to the advice. He entered the palace. Mu Yangling had no choice but to wipe his tears while saying, "Your father didn't lie to you." The little bear just closed his eyes and cried, and shouted aggrievedly, "Daddy is a liar, he is a villain, a big villain, I will never play with him again, and I will not sleep with him." Mu Yangling hugged him into his arms and swayed him around the room. Maybe it was his mother's embrace that reassured him, or maybe it was Mu Yangling's whispered comfort that soothed his heart. Finally, the little bear was willing to open his eyes and look at the mother, just looked at her with wet eyes washed by tears. Mu Yangling found it difficult to refuse his request, and she couldn't let Chi Heiran be accused of deceiving his son. Mu Yangling hugged him and sat down on the chair, let him straddle her lap, looked into his eyes and asked softly, "Is that why you want to enter the palace to attend the crown prince's ceremony?" Little Xiong pouted, and said, "Daddy lied, he clearly agreed to take me into the palace." "What did Daddy tell you at the time?" Little Xiong is already very smart, he can copy word for word what the adults said. He said aggrievedly, "Daddy said that he wants to bring little Xiong into the palace, to see brother Xiaobao become the prince. He doesn't mean anything, he is a bad person." Daddy said he was going to bring the little bear into the palace himself. Little bear nodded fiercely. "But Daddy is not at home now, he has gone into the palace. Uncle Huang is very busy, so busy that he can't sleep, so Daddy went into the palace to help him with work. He can't leave the palace, so he can't bring the little bear into the palace." Mu Yangling said in a low voice, "This is work, and it's an emergency, and your father can't control it, so you can't blame him." Little Xiong tilted his head to look at his mother, still somewhat puzzled. He pointed at his mother and said, "Mother, take me into the palace." Mu Yangling explained, "You are too big, Mother can't hug you, and you can't walk, so you can't carry you." Little Xiong's eyes filled with tears again. He looked at his mother wronged, and said, "Why didn't Daddy come? Daddy wants to help Uncle Huang work." Little bear didn't care, and just said, "I want Daddy, I want Daddy." He slid down Mu Yangling's legs and was about to run out towards the door. "In the palace, I haven't left the palace yet." Little bear ran out while wiping his tears, crying, "I want Daddy, I want Daddy." Little bear held onto the gate, his shoulders twitched from crying, and when he looked outside, there was no one on the empty street. Little bear twitched even more, looked at the empty street with hazy eyes, and murmured, "Daddy, Daddy." Before the crown prince was conferred, he had to offer sacrifices to heaven, because it was Qi Ziyuan's most solemn conferment after he ascended the throne, and Qi Ziyuan was unwilling to wrong his son. This celebration is not a simplified version, but a full version. Mu Yangling, half a month ago I trained in front of the old mother in the palace, knowing that this kind of fatigue is definitely not something a 3-year-old child can bear. They have to line up to enter the palace at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they may not be able to leave the palace until 8 o'clock in the evening. Only tea is provided, and they can only bring some pastries in their purses and sleeves to fight hunger and not have too much smell. How dare Mu Yangling take the little bear brought into the palace? If Chi Heiran took him with him, then little bear could still find time to rest in the emperor's lounge, and it would be fine to find someone to watch over him, so there was no need to think about going to the queen's place, because the queen herself didn't have time to rest and space. Only the emperor and prince have. But seeing his son leaning on the doorframe and looking at the street crying for his father, Mu Yangling was also very worried. Okay. Mu Yangling promised him a lot of fun and delicious food, but Xiao Xiang looked at the entrance of the street firmly, determined to wait for his father to come back. Every afternoon, he came here to wait for his father, and his father would ride from the other side of the street. He ran over to the gate, picked him up and walked around the street before returning home. Little Bear decided that he would just sit here and wait today. He couldn't believe that his father wouldn't come back. Mu Yangling could only change his words, even if Daddy is going to come back, he won't be back until the afternoon. It's only morning. Let's go back first, shall we? Little Bear sat on the threshold, watching the street without making a sound. Mu Yangling got up, patted his buttocks and said, "Mother made stuffed tofu." The little bear continued to make the father's stone, and Mu Yangling said quietly, "Oh, now the kitchen is contracted by my grandmother, so my mother doesn't have to cook, so my grandmother made the stuffed tofu." Bear's ears moved. Mu Yangling continued, "Grandmother also made lion head with crab powder, which is my favorite dish." Little Bear turned around and said, "It's also my favorite." Mu Yangling sighed, "But if you don't go back, you won't be able to eat it." "I like it so much, what if I can't control it and eat it all?" Little Bear drooled and struggled. "Your father won't come back until evening, and it's still a long time before evening. Are you planning to skip breakfast, lunch, or afternoon tea? Did Mother tell you that Grandma will make shrimp slides in the afternoon?" Little Bear complained loudly, "No." "Then Mother will tell you now, your grandmother will make shrimp slides for us as a snack in the afternoon. How about it? Do you want to go back with Mother?" Little Xiang turned his head to look at the empty street again, and muttered, "Daddy won't be back until evening." Mu Yangling nodded fiercely. "Grandma now makes yong tau fu and crab noodles with lion's head." Mu Yangling continued to nod. "There will be shrimp slippery in the afternoon." Little Xiang hesitated for a while with his chin propped up, then grabbed the door frame and said to his mother, "I'll come and wait for Daddy after I finish eating shrimp slippery." "Okay, when the time comes, Mother will come and wait with you. If you can still remember this at that time." Mu Yangling really tried his best to keep the little bear firmly in the backyard with delicious food and toys. For this reason, he even disrupted his biological clock and made him take a nap after afternoon tea. Mu Yangling got up exhausted, and said, "This child is too difficult to serve, Mother, you have to seduce him tomorrow and let him stay in the mansion." Shu Wanyang said, "I find it difficult. This kid has the same temper as you and Heiran when they were young. He is stubborn. If he is sure, he will not change. What if I can't coax him tomorrow?" "If you can't coax him, you can't bring him into the palace. If no one takes him, you will be impeached by the censor if you lose your manners before the imperial court. Besides, how can he bear the sun for a whole day?" Mu Yangling thought it is better to stay at home and have his mother and younger siblings to play with him than to go to the palace and suffer. But who knew that the child was so obsessed? Just when Mu Yangling thought that today could pass by, Xiao Xiang got up from the bed in a daze, staggered towards the gate, and muttered, "Daddy is back, I'm going to wait for Daddy." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 754. At the beginning of Mishi, 5 o'clock in the morning, Mu Yangling got out of the carriage with the tightly wrapped bear in his arms. The people in front hurriedly turned sideways to let her go first. Mu Yangling nodded slightly, and brought the bear into the palace. Officials and family members who lined up in a long line also lined up on the left and right sides to enter the palace. When Chi Heiran trotted over to pick her up, he saw a thick ball in her arms. He pulled off the blanket helplessly and glanced at his sleeping son. Seeing him tremble, he faintly sobbed twice, obviously crying hard, feeling sore and aching in his heart. He reached out and hugged his son into his arms, and asked in a low voice, "Why are you crying so hard?" Mu Yangling was also helpless. "He's sure that you promised him, you can take him with you. If you don't want to take him with you in the future, you can't make random promises just to please him." Don't think that the child will not be good when he is young. Got it, he remembers it. Chi Heiran responded in a low voice, wrapped the blanket, and held it in his arms. Go, have you brought food? If you get tired from standing on the way, change your feet, don't just stand in a military posture, go to the side hall to rest when you are free. I have already told the emperor's wife, let her take care of you more. Mu Yangling agreed, and said, take the child with you. Little Xiang kept crying for his father last night, and he didn't fall asleep until early in the morning. After Mu Yangling agreed to take him into the palace, he grabbed her clothes tightly, for fear that his mother would leave her and enter the palace alone. The child's dream was full of scenes where his father didn't want him. In the dream, Chi Heiran started to cry in fright. Chi Heiran heard his son's soft crying when he walked halfway. His eyes were crying softly, and his heart ached so badly, he coaxed in a low voice, little bear, daddy is here. Little Xiang opened his eyes, saw his father was taken aback, blinked away the tears in his eyes, confirmed that it was his father, pouted his mouth angrily, and said, daddy doesn't mean anything, he is a bad person. Chi Heiran anxiously said, daddy doesn't count if he doesn't say anything, won't he bring you into the palace now? Look, we are in the palace right now. Daddy will take you to see Brother Xiaobao right now. Little Xiang got up from his father's arms and took a look, only to find that they were in a corridor. He looked left and right curiously, and saw that they were all palace walls. The morning breeze blew into his neck, and he couldn't help shrinking back into the blanket. Suspicion, no, this is not the palace is a place with flowers and trees, and a big house. Chi Heiran twitched the corners of his mouth, hugged him and continued to walk forward, saying, after passing this corridor, you will see flowers, trees, and a big house. Little Xiang hugged his father's neck, looked left and right, and asked, where is mother? I want mother. Your mother has gone to the emperor's aunt. Today you will hang out with your father, and you will not see her until evening. Little Bear hesitated for a while, and finally said in a low voice, I want mother. Chi Heiran froze, and asked, then you don't want daddy anymore? Little Xiang was silent for a long time, then whispered again, I still want mother. Chi Heiran suddenly felt that he had hurt his son a lot. You must know that he played well with his son these few days. Almost every time he asked him whether he wanted to play with his mother or his father, the boy would immediately hug him neck, and replied loudly, play with daddy. Chi Heiran touched his son with pity, and said, son, I'm sorry, I will apologize to you tomorrow, but your mother can't take you today, so you just follow me. Said, let's go to see Brother Xiaobao now, if you cry, you should be made fun of by Brother Xiaobao. Little Bear's tears were suppressed immediately. He turned his head and thought that after seeing Brother Xiaobao for a while, he must take him to find his mother. Little Xiang thought vaguely, in the palace, following his mother is more fun than following his father. The blanket was so comfortable, Chi Heiran hugged him and shook him again. Little Bear fell asleep just thinking of this, and when he arrived at Xiaobao's place, the child had already fallen asleep, and Chi Heiran didn't even wake up when he put him on the couch. Come over. Xiaobao had just been dug up by the maid, and he was still a little dazed. He leaned up to take a look at Xiao Xiang, and seeing that he was sleeping soundly, he wanted to sleep even more. Chi Heiran hugged him aside and asked the servant to quickly put on clothes for him. Xiaobao was wearing a prince's suit, and it took about 3/4 of an hour to put it on completely. In order to avoid accidents later, the clothes had to be put on in advance. After putting on the clothes for Xiaobao, he had already fallen asleep with his head bowed. The servant hurriedly carried him to another couch and put him in a good place, smoothed out the clothes to make him sleep more comfortably. Different from Xiao Xiang's sloppy, swaying sleeping posture, Xiaobao sleeps well, with his hands folded on his stomach, and his legs hanging naturally on both sides. Chi Heiran was stunned for a moment, not to mention Xiao Xiang. it was him. I can't maintain the sleeping position either. As soon as the day dawned, Little Bear got up. He realized that this was not a place he was familiar with. As soon as he rolled his eyes, he quietly left the soft couch, and wanted to hide, when he heard a chuckle above his head, and Little Bear heard the laughter. He jumped up all of a sudden, and turned around with Xiao Bao was sitting on a high chair smiling at him, beckoning, "Come on, brother." The Little Bear ran over and saw the food in front of him, drooling, and shouted, "Brother, I want to eat too." Xiao Bao slid off the high chair, hugged the bear and was about to push it up. The waiter at one side saw the bear and quickly took the bear from his hand and sat down on the high chair opposite, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and said, "Your Highness, you sit down quickly, and the servants will come and hug the little prince." This little prince is a little finger taller than the eldest prince, yet the eldest prince actually wants to hug him into a high chair. Little Bear patted the table and said, "I want to sit next to brother Xiaobao, I want to sit next to him." The waiter hurriedly carried the high chair to Xiaobao's side, and the high chairs of the two brothers touched each other. The chair was bigger than him, and the two of them moved their heads to discuss the delicacies on the table. Seeing the carefree looks of the eldest prince and the young prince, the servant had no choice but to remind in a low voice, "Your Highness, young prince, the ritual of offering sacrifices to heaven is about to begin, and the emperor will send someone to pick you up soon." Xiao Bao immediately grabbed a bean bag and stuffed it into the little bear's mouth, saying, "Hurry up, father and uncle will come to pick us up soon." The little bear was still at a loss for a moment, so Xiaobao let out an oops and said in an old-fashioned way, eat quickly, the emperor said that you can't eat, drink, or even change clothes when offering sacrifices to heaven. If you don't eat, I won't be able to eat any more in a while." As soon as the little bear heard that he was going to be hungry, he immediately grabbed something and stuffed it into his mouth. The waiter quickly poured water for him, and said in a low voice, "Slow down, don't choke." Little Xiong glared, and said unconvinced, "Didn't you tell us to hurry up?" Xiaobao waved his hand as usual and said, "Brother, don't worry about them, they all talk like this." Alas, Xiaobao sighed, and said, "Sometimes I don't understand why they always say contradictory things." Waiter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 755. As the son of Prince Rong, Xiao Xiong can participate in the sacrifice to heaven, or not. The former depends on his rank, while the latter depends on his age. But worshipping heaven is not so easy. They have to go out from Zhaoxiang Gate, and then enter the Temple of Heaven through the left gate. From Zhaoxiang Gate to the Temple of Heaven, even the emperor has to walk, and a series of sacrificial activities have to be carried out at the Temple of Heaven. This tossing was completed at the first moment of Shenqi, 3 p.m., during which I could not rest, let alone eat or drink. Qi Heiran had rehearsed with his eldest brother, if he really could lose half his life, his own son would naturally not suffer from this crime. So Qi Heiran can say how tired the sacrifice to heaven is, and he is short of saying that this is not human. But not only did Xiao Xiong not give up the idea of following him, but his eyes became more determined. He stepped forward to grab Xiaobao's hand, firmly said, "Brother Xiaobao, don't be afraid, I will protect you." He turned his head and said to his father, "Father, I want to accompany brother Xiaobao to sacrifice to heaven, how can I let brother Xiaobao suffer alone?" Qi Heiran almost sat down on the ground. Well, what was he doing in vain? Little Xiong aggressively followed behind Xiaobao, and when Qi Xiaoyuan saw him smiling, he waved to him, hugged him in his arms, and said with a smile, "Why are you here too?" In front of Qi Xiaoyuan, Little Bear was a little shy, lowered his head and said, "I miss Daddy." Qi Xiaoyuan laughed, rubbed his hair with his big hands, put him down and said, "Go and follow your brother Xiaobao, and help Uncle Huang take care of your brother Xiaobao." The little bear patted his chest proudly for a moment and promised to take good care of brother Xiaobao. At this time, the queen was already waiting at the gate of Zhaoxiang Gate. She was the only woman who could participate in the sacrifice to heaven. The other officials were led by Mu Yangling to wait in Zhaoyang Hall. Then pray for Daki in Zhaoyang Hall. Little Bear followed Little Treasure, raised his head confidently, and walked forward with the adults. The ceremony of offering sacrifices to heaven was mainly performed by the emperor, and he only needed to stand behind Little Treasure and watch. Master Yuanhui had already been waiting at the Temple of Heaven in advance, and when he saw the emperor bringing his ministers in, he smiled slightly and saluted with palms together. Qi Ziyuan stretched out his hand to help him, and said, "Thank you, Master Yuanhui. It's my little monk's blessing to be able to assist the emperor in offering sacrifices to heaven." He looked at Xiaobao with burning eyes, the light in his eyes was even brighter, and he slightly bent over and said, "The Crown Prince's dragon and phoenix qualities are really a blessing from Daki. Congratulations to the emperor. Although the eldest prince is only 5 years old, he already has a faint dragon breath all over his body. As long as the way of heaven remains unchanged, he must be the next Ming Jun." Looking at the solid dragon spirit behind Qi Ziyuan, Yuan Hui is even more satisfied. The body is damaged, and under the protection of the real dragon's energy, he can survive the crisis safely. It will not be a problem to reign for 20 or 30 years. When the time comes to help the troubled times, the merits of helping Ming Jun should be able to offset a lot of evil spirits on him. I don't know what sins he did in the past few lives, so that he was lonely and helpless in the 3 reincarnations. He was the lone star of Tianxia. The master warned him not to interfere with the way of heaven. As long as he had a kind heart and did good deeds, one day he would be able to eliminate the karma on his body. But the goodness of the 3 generations can still make the evil spirit behind him so thick and thick, who knows how many lives will be reincarnated. For the sake of his future generations, and for the sake of the suffering common people, he was willing to take a gamble, but the facts proved that he was right. Indeed, a lot has been eliminated. He has obtained so many merits and virtues just by advancing the trend of peace in the world by more than 20 years. If he keeps the next Ming Jun healthy and long-lived, how much karma will he be able to eliminate? As long as he has 1/3 of the merits of Kuangfu Qi Ziyuan, at least he can live a better life in the next life. Yuan Hui's thoughts turned, his face remained silent, he closed his eyes slightly, discarded his miscellaneous thoughts, and sincerely prayed for Daki, the emperor, and the prince. Little Treasure is weak, and he has never stood in the sun for so long before. The sweat slid down his cheeks to his neck, and his body shook slightly. When the little bear saw his eyeballs, he turned around. Standing obediently with his head lowered, the servants did not dare to raise their heads, so they quietly moved behind Xiaobao and stretched out their palms to support his body. Xiaobao froze, and couldn't help looking at his father. Qi Ziyuan and Qi Heiran were praying with Yuan Hui with their eyes slightly closed. Where did they notice the 2 children? Only then did Xiaobao feel relieved. The 2 children had a tacit understanding. Xiaobao stretched out 2 fingers from under the wide sleeves and gestured backwards. Xiao Xiong took a slight wrong step, retracted his palm, and stood upright, letting Xiao Baobao lean slightly on his shoulder. Feeling that the fatigue in his body has eased, Xiaobao exhaled a long breath, and he didn't feel so dizzy anymore. Little Xiong still had the strength to turn his eyes around and saw that everyone was solemn and silent, but he didn't dare to go too far. He tilted his head to see that Xiaobao also closed his eyes slightly, muttering a prayer of blessing, and he was the only one. I haven't learned it, but it's not good for him to look around with his eyes open, and he can only slightly close his eyes. He still feels hot, but when he closes his eyes, he feels a cool wind blowing across his cheeks. Although the sun in late autumn is big, but it's not poisonous, Xiao Xiang felt that the sweat he shed was slowly dried by the wind, and the wind blew across his cheeks and into his neck, making him extremely comfortable. Little Bear's consciousness gradually became blurred. Little Treasure leaned against Little Bear for a while, thinking that he must be tired, so he remembered, and was about to signal him to back off, when he heard Little Bear's shallow breathing. Little Treasure and Little Bear shared the same bed so many times. He was so familiar, he froze for a moment, then quietly stretched out his fingers and twisted the flesh on the Little Bear's hand. After twisting, seeing that he didn't respond, he was sure that he was really asleep. He can fall asleep standing up. Xiaobeo's admiration for the Little Bear can no longer be expressed in words. He carefully glanced at his father and uncle, and then at Master Yuanhui standing on top. He didn't dare to move, for fear that he would move the Little Bear just plop forward. The two cousins leaned on each other like this. Little Treasure was infected by the Little Bear. He closed his eyes and prayed halfway through, and almost fell asleep. When the Little Bear woke up hungry, the ritual of offering sacrifices to heaven was already halfway through. He stretched out his hand and pushed Little Treasure. Moved 2 steps back, shrugged his stiff arms, moved his stiff feet, and was about to yawn, when he happened to meet the eyes of Master Yuanhui above. Yuanhui looked at him with a gentle smile, and Xiao Xiang's yawn disappeared abruptly. He stared at Yuanhui in a daze, and Yuanhui said loudly, "Send the Emperor God." Qi Xiaoyuan opened his eyes, bowed 3 times and kowtowed 9 times, and played the chapter of Qingping. Little Treasure in front of him also knelt down slowly, and fell to the ground. Little Xiang hurriedly knelt down after him, and didn't want to go to see Yuanhui again. Yuanhui withdrew her gaze, and slept on her back during the sacrifice ceremony. The 2 children obviously didn't know how serious the consequences of this incident were. If it happened, a big crime of disrespect could make the newly crowned crown prince and the young prince fall into the abyss. Yuanhui unknowingly sped up the movements in his hands, and only waited for Qi Xiaoyuan to finish 3 bows and 9 kowtows before immediately proclaiming the sacrifice and burning it. After the sacrifices were burned, the chapter of Yuping was played, and the sacrifice to heaven was finally over. The emperor could drive back to the palace, but before driving back to the palace, the emperor had to move a little bit. Qi Heiran took a step forward to support Qi Xiaoyuan, and said with a smile, "Brother Emperor, I will take you back to Longju. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 756. Qi Xiaoyuan waved at the 2 children and said, "Come here." Xiao Xiang took Xiaobeo's hand and walked over slowly. There was no way, both of them knelt so that their feet were numb. Qi Xiaoyuan hugged them in his arms, motioned for the sedan chair, turned his head to Qi Heiran and said, "Veterans who are over 50 years old will be escorted back to Jianqing Palace in sedan chairs." "Thank you, Majesty Long-En." The ministers who hadn't got up bowed down again. Qi Heiran put down the curtain, and the servants carried the emperor and the eldest prince and the young prince away, and the empress sedan chair followed closely behind him. Back at Jianqing Palace, Qi Xiaoyuan took the 2 children by the hand into the side hall, handed them over to the servant, and said, "Little Treasure, you still have 3/4 of an hour to rest." Little Treasure let out a sigh of relief, said promise, and was about to be taken down to wipe the sweat off his back, but Little Bear jumped up and down and shouted, "Quick, quick, I'm going to pee my pants." Little Treasure's face was flushed red. Seeing this, the waiter knew that the eldest prince might be embarrassed to say so, so he hurriedly picked up the 2 children and rushed behind the screen. From time to time, Little Bear exclaimed, "Don't take off your clothes, just take them off pants." Qi Xiaoyuan, who hadn't gone far, froze for a moment, then shook his head and laughed. After solving the 3rd level, the 2 children were carried out comfortably, washed their hands and incense, and then the maid brought the food. Xiao Xiang's was a bowl of hot preserved egg and lean pork porridge, served with several dishes, small dishes, Xiao Bao is a plate of snacks and half a bowl of boiled water. Little Bear was very embarrassed, and pushed his things to him. Brother, eat this from me. Xiao Bao shook his head. Brother, eat it, I will be appointed by the court soon, so I can't eat this. He may still have to stand for a while in the afternoon. What if he can't hold back after eating porridge? The little bear immediately dragged the things back and ate his porridge twice. Seeing that there were 2 snacks left in Xiao Bao's plate, he asked, "Do you still want to eat?" Xiao Bao shook his head and pushed the plate to him. Xiao Xiong ate snacks and drank water at the same time. He felt that being a crown prince was so pitiful. This kind of sympathy reached its peak when he changed his clothes and climbed onto the couch to sleep, while Xiao Bao was carried to the Qianqing palace to be sealed. I couldn't help but feel rejoicing. Fortunately his father is just a prince, and he just needs to be a little prince, otherwise he would have to read a lot of books and do a lot of homework like brother Xiao Bao, so he can't eat, and he can't play. How pitiful. Little Bear decided to treat brother Xiao Bao better in the future. He is so pitiful, he should take care of brother Xiao Bao even more. In the main hall of Qianqing Palace, Qi Xiaoyuan is officially giving Xiao Bao the name Wenchen, bestowing the word Tianyue, to be blessed by the heavens, and to enjoy a moment of peace, which shows Qi Xiaoyuan's expectations for the prince. Qi Xiaoyuan formally crowned Xiao Bao and made him the prince. Xiao Bao respectfully knelt down and kowtowed 3 times and kowtowed 9 times to thank him. He officially became the prince. At this time, it was already dark outside, and all the ministers retreated out of the palace respectfully. On the way, someone caught up with Zhou Rongxian who was walking in front, and said with a smile, "The emperor has great expectations for the prince." With the name of Chen, in ancient times, there was only the prince with 1 ear. Chen, Yuye, the intersection of heaven and earth, is where the North Star is located. It's just that he didn't understand why the emperor used Chen as the name instead of giving it a character. Ordinarily, this character is more suitable for the emperor's expectation for the prince. The emperor is the emperor, but he is also the father. God is no worse than Chen Rongxian explained with a smile. The official was shocked, and only then realized that he had inadvertently asked the question. Rongxian stopped, looked at the official who bowed his head and retreated, and said, "The prince's name is not something we can talk about, my lord, please be cautious in your words and deeds in the future." "Yes, I will be educated." Seeing Rongxian walking away, the official wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He must have suffered from heat stroke after standing for a day, so he asked such potentially troublesome questions. He patted his mouth, and hurriedly followed in the footsteps of his colleagues to leave the palace. Qi Heiran didn't expect Qi Xiaoyuan to change his mind temporarily. "Didn't you say Tianyu is the name and Chen is the character?" Qi Xiaoyuan smiled and said, "I always think that they have few brothers, so it's better to write like Xiao Xiong. From now on, when the brothers slip down and stand outside, everyone will know that they are of the same line. Moreover, I am his father. All fathers hope that their children will be healthy and safe, and be blessed by God, so let's take it as my expectation." Qi Heiran lowered his eyes and said, "Brother, Xiao Bao's health is already very good, and he will surely live a long and healthy life with prosperous children and grandchildren." Qi Xiaoyuan nodded with a smile. "Naturally, well, today is a great day, you and your siblings don't go out of the palace, let's celebrate together as a family." The family banquet was placed in the side hall of Cunning Palace. Li Jinghua hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should invite concubine Xian over. Qi Xiaoyuan had already changed into homely clothes and came out with Xiao Bao in his arms. In the past, Li Jinghua grabbed the candy on the table and stuffed it into his mouth. Li Jinghua dismissed the idea instantly, with a smile on his face, stepped forward and patted the little bear's paw lightly, and said angrily, "It's almost time for dinner, so we can't eat any more. Eat candy, be careful when your mother comes and beats you." The little bear covered his mouth with his hands, his eyeballs rolled around, his cheeks bulged and he chewed quickly, afraid that his mother would come and he would not swallow it. Chi Xiaoyuan pulled the little bear into his arms when he saw it, and said angrily, "What are you scaring the child for? Don't be afraid, little bear, eat slowly, your mother is here and Uncle Huang is here." The little bear was chewing with puffed cheeks while thinking about the authority of the emperor's uncle. Before he could figure it out, he saw his mother and father carrying a jug of wine each. The little bear plunged into Chi Xiaoyuan's arms with a woo. He hugged his waist tightly, buried him in his arms and continued to chew the candy in his mouth. He regretted a little bit, he shouldn't have stuffed so much just now. Chi Xiaoyuan just glared at the couple, patted the little bear and comforted him softly, "Don't be afraid, little bear, there is still Uncle Huang. Mu Yangling and Chi Heiran died wronged. They just took the wine that Chi Xiaoyuan buried after he broke into the palace. Why were they stared at when they entered the door?" The cheating little bear pricked up his ears. Seeing that his parents didn't dare to refute, he stopped worrying and just continued to nest in Chi Xiaoyuan's arms and ate all the candy in his mouth. He put all his strength on Uncle Wang's knees, calves still up and down. Chi Heiran scolded when he saw it, "Xiao Xiang, why are you so decent? Stand up for me quickly." Chi Xiaoyuan patted the little bear on the back reassuringly, and said lightly, "Is this the place where you teach your son a lesson? You were not half as good as him when you were young." Both of Cub's legs were raised proudly, and he even twisted his ass proudly at Chi Heiran. Chi Heiran raised his eyebrows in anger. Mu Yangling calmly helped Li Jinghua set the chopsticks, and taught his son in front of Chi Xiaoyuan, "Isn't he a pet bear in disguise? She is good at settling accounts after the fall, the county magistrate might as well take care of her now, just teach her slowly when she returns home." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 757. Xiaobao ate all the candy in his mouth, wiped his mouth, and then came out of the uncle's arms. He smiled at his parents thinking that there was no trace, and said, "I am playing hide and seek with Uncle Huang." Chi Heiran stared at the sugar stains on his mouth and face, and said with a sneer, "I hid in Uncle Huang's arms because I was afraid that your Uncle Huang would not know where you were hiding." Xiao Bao pursed his lips and smiled, and secretly pointed at Xiao Xiang's face from behind his father. Xiao Xiang blinked, and his little palm followed to touch his face. He was originally a candy that he grabbed with his hands. More, sticky, little bear looked at his hand, then reached out to his father and said, "I want to wash my hands." At this point, this kid didn't even realize that he was exposed. Chi Heiran looked at him sadly, and then looked at his elder brother with accusing eyes. How does this kid look like him? He was clever when he was a child, okay. When he did bad things, he would destroy the evidence in the first place. Chi Xiaoyuan looked away slightly, and then remembered that this is Chi Heiran's son. Why should he be embarrassed? For education issues, you should go to your parents. You should stare back confidently, and shake the clothes on your body, motioning him to look at the clothes that were dirty by his son's little hands. Chi Heiran stared at the stain on Chi Xiaoyuan's stomach. He could guarantee that it was his son's saliva, and it must have been stained by this kid when he was eating candy in it just now. The big brother's clothes seemed to be new. Heiran coughed lightly, pulled his son to take him to wash his hands, and seeing that he was far enough away, he taught him in a low voice, "You are not allowed to hide and eat sweets in the future, especially you can't jump into the arms of the emperor's uncle, you know. Then will you and mother beat me up?" "I definitely won't," Chi Heiran assured. "As for whether your mother would," Chi Heiran looked down at his son sympathetically, and said in his heart, "There is no doubt about it. Will that deduct my snacks?" "I definitely won't," Chi Heiran replied decisively, "such things as snacks are in the care of Aling, and it would be useless for him to have more." Little Xiang let out a breath, felt relieved, patted his chest and said, "Next time I won't hide in Uncle Wang's arms to eat candy. In fact, eating candy inside is also very boring for me, and I can't even savor the taste of candy. Xiaoxiang imitated Xiaobeo's old-fashioned sigh and sighed, very sad, those candies were all in vain. He smashed his mouth, constantly savoring the sweetness in his mouth. Chi Heiran gave him a glass of salt water and said, "Hurry up and rinse your mouth, can you still eat with the sweetness in your mouth?" Little Bear didn't want to, so if he rinsed his mouth again, his candies would really be for nothing. Chi Heiran escorted him to gargle with salt water, and when he pulled him out, his face was full of anger. His already baby-fat face became rounder. Not to mention Li Jinghua, even Chi Xiaoyuan was smacked. He let go with his son's hand, he waved to Little Bear, let him sit beside him, and asked, "Come and see the delicious food that Uncle Wang's family has prepared for you. What do you want to eat? Uncle Huang will pick it up for you." Xiao Bao stood up and picked up a meatball and threw it into the little bear's bowl, saying, "Father, Little Bear likes to eat meatballs, fish balls, and shrimp balls." The little bear broke away from his father's hand, ran to Xiaobeo's side, supported the table, climbed onto his stool, grabbed the chopsticks and said, "That's not a meatball, that's called a lion's head, like a lion's head, woo. Aren't you a bear? How can you eat a lion's head? You should eat a bear's head." Xiao Bao glanced around the table, but when he didn't see anything that fit a bear's head, he looked at the queen and said, "Queen, Little Bear to eat the bear's head." The little bear suddenly realized, "Yes, I am a bear, I want to eat the bear's head, mother, I want to eat the bear's head." The adults at the table stared blankly at the two bear children. Mu Yangling rubbed his forehead and said, "There is no such thing as a bear's head dish in this world. A lion is similar to a bear. You should eat the lion's head first." The little bear pouted, "Why can a lion's head cook but a bear's head can't? Aren't bears better than lions?" Just as Chi Xiaoyuan was about to explain, Chi Heiran pulled his sleeve, leaned into his ear and whispered, "Brother, please don't explain, if you explain, no one will be able to eat tonight, just let him mutter well, he'll forget about it in a while. If you explain it, he can extend 10 questions in one answer, fully demonstrating what is 100,000 wise." Piana Ling taught children from an early age to ask if they don't understand. Just ask, if someone answers, his questions will be one after another, so strange that people can't answer them. If no one pays attention to him, he will forget it after mumbling for a while. It's not a good time to answer questions now that everyone is hungry, though let him mutter to himself. Sure enough, Chi Xiaoyuan closed his mouth, picked up the chopsticks and picked up the chopsticks first, "Let's eat." Then everyone moved their chopsticks. After the little bear finished eating a lion's head, he really forgot about this question. The little bear forgot, but Xiaobao didn't. Solve again. Just like Chi Heiran knew his own son, Chi Xiaoyuan also knew his son's nature well, so he put down his chopsticks, and Chi Xiaoyuan took the lead and said, "Play by yourself first, Heiran, and I have something to talk about." After pulling Chi Heiran to the other side, Xiao Bao, who was about to speak, swallowed back the question. His father had business to do and couldn't disturb him. He turned to look at his mother and aunt. Cooking is a job in the kitchen. The queen mother and aunt can cook, so they should know these things better than the emperor and uncle. With a firm mind, Xiaobao took Xiaoxiang's hand and stepped forward. Seeing this, Chi Xiaoyuan heaved a sigh of relief, and beckoned Chi Heiran to sit down, but he really had something serious to tell Chi Heiran. The crown prince's conferment ceremony is over, and Chi Heiran and the others are about to go to Canaan. After all, the border can't be without a coach for too long. And now it's mid-September, if you don't leave as soon as possible, it will be even more difficult to leave when the weather is cold, but Xiao Xiao's family is about to give birth. It is obviously not easy to go south at this time, and the Fan family's situation is special, even if Aunt Xia has figured it out now. However, they didn't dare to leave Xiao Xia alone in the capital. If Fan Saiwen took the child to the Fan mansion, it would be difficult to bring him out. Because of his status, Qi Ziyuan couldn't meddle in the Fan family's affairs, so he said, let Zijin stay here first, and you can share more with Qianan's affairs first. Besides, I found a doctor for Zijin, who is old Gao. It's not good to leave the capital, just let him take care of his health during this time. Zijin will agree, he is a workaholic and can't rest for a moment. Qi Ziyuan smiled and said, I have my own way. You just need to manage Qianan's affairs well. He is not born to be hard-working. In the end, he was forced by our brothers. If it weren't for the lack of people here. In terms of enjoyment, the two brothers are not half as good as Fan Zijin, but for the past few years he has been working like an ascetic. For what purpose? Not for their brother's inheritance. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 758. Mushi set off earlier than Chi Heiran and the others. On the second day after the prince's conferment ceremony, Qi Ziyuan gathered all the officials in the palace for a symposium. At the meeting, Qi Ziyuan expressed his trust and expectations for them. I hope they can go to the border to continue to shine and serve the country, especially for General Yuan Zhao, who came to Beijing on behalf of General Yuan. De Qi paid great respect to General Yuan. The generals who were summoned into the palace saw that the emperor had no intention of killing the donkey, but also faintly revealed the meaning of raising troops intensively, training them diligently, and regaining the homeland occupied by Xixia and Dajin. Everyone felt that their pride was rising and they were very excited. I wish I could kneel down immediately and express my willingness to do my best for the emperor. The emperor was satisfied when he saw this, so he mentioned the common situation in the army of eating empty salaries and encroaching on soldiers' food and salaries. The emperor said, soldiers are the foundation of the army. You are all generals who followed me to death, and you have all been soldiers. You should know how hard it is for soldiers. Great Qi has just been established, and the foundation of the Great Wall has only just been laid. If anyone dares to eat empty wages, deduct soldiers' food and salaries, and destroy the foundation of our Great Qi, even if he is my brother who has been born and died, I will not show mercy. After the emperor finished speaking, he smashed the wine glass in his hand with a bang. All the officials immediately knelt down on the seats. Qi Heiran also knelt respectfully, and said, Your Majesty, the ministers must live up to the emperor, to De Qi, to everyone. Negative soldier. The ministers must not fail the emperor, the great Qi, and the soldiers. The voice resounded through the sky and echoed in the corridors of the palace. Qi Ziyuan stood up with a ha, picked up another glass of wine, and said, As long as you don't let me down, I will never let you down. Knowing that Qi Ziyuan kept his promise, the generals were a little excited. Although he didn't know if Qi Ziyuan had changed after he became emperor, he kept his promise before. Now that he had just made such a promise in front of his officials, he asked the historian to record daily life note, then there is an 80% possibility. How does this not excite them? What do generals fear most? One is that there is no battle, and the good bow is hidden. The other is that the emperor taboos, and the rabbit dies. How many generals were liquidated after the establishment of the dynasty in history? I can't count the number. Which emperor didn't make a big promise before ascending the throne? There are those who die well, and naturally there are those who implicate the family, but no matter whether they have made great achievements forever or have a good relationship with the emperor, after the establishment of the dynasty, the emperor still relies on few generals who have made great achievements, and most of them are promoted lieutenants or newcomers as generals, right? Why did King Rong bring so many generals to garrison Lingnan alone? Isn't it to train new generals? But now it seems that the emperor may have the intention of promoting new generals, but he has no tendency to hide them in the snow. It seems to train more soldiers to regain their homeland. Although money is good, it is not as important as power. The more powerful people are, the more they can make money. The emperor is also right. If soldiers are embezzled and cause chaos, not only will they lose their security, but even their families will be implicated. As long as the emperor is willing to use them, is he still worried about spending money? What's more, Daki is poor. Now the army really has nothing to covet except for the food and pay of soldiers. You can't go greedy for military equipment. They guard the border, and the border is not stable now. If you are greedy for military equipment, then almost like suicide. The generals who were worried that this trip to Beijing would be a hangmen banquet cheered up and expressed their loyalty to the emperor. Yuan Zhao also raised his head and took a sneak peek at Qi Ziyuan, who was seated above him. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at Qi Heiran. Seeing him still kneeling down respectfully, he sighed slightly. It was a misfortune. Who would have expected to see him back then? Everyone should respectfully call brother Yuan Zhao's Qi Ziyuan to be the emperor. His own prestige is there, and with Qi Heiran's support, De Qi's country will not have any problems in 30 years, so what about him? Will you guard the country under General Yuan for the rest of your life? As a general, it is natural for him to guard the country, but when others guard the country, they can still make meritorious deeds and leave immortal meritorious deeds, while he guards the country only guards the country. He is the son of General Yuan in the Yuan family army, but who still remembers that he was still a general of Yuan Jiajin? Yuan Zhao clenched his hands into fists and lowered his head deeply, so he didn't see Qi Heiran raised his head slightly and gave him a strange look. After the banquet, the generals bid farewell to the emperor and returned to the camp one after another. Although they had lieutenants and many generals presiding over them, it was impossible for them to leave the army for too long. Qi Ziyuan approved one by one, and Mu Shi was about to leave. He took his military advisor and dozens of guards and left quickly. Xu Wanyang and the others set off 2 days later. Worry about security. What Mu Shi was worried about was Mu Bowen's marriage. This time when he brought Mu Bowen to the capital, the couple planned to find him a wife. However, very few people were willing to speak up, and Mu Yangling asked someone to inquire quietly to find out the reason. Those who are willing to marry the Mu family are mostly because of the powerful status of the Mu family and Mu Yangling, or because the children in the family have personality problems, and the girl Xu Wanyang likes, none of her family is willing to talk to the Mu family. The current status of the Mu family is not low, but the foundation is shallow. Although Mu Bowen is the eldest son, but he studies literature, and looking at his body, he knows that it is impossible for his son to inherit his father's career in the future. The son of a general will become a civil servant. It means that in the future, most of them will have to rely on Mu Bowen's own efforts, and in the officialdom, those who rely only on individuals must be much worse than those who have families to rely on. Moreover, it is said that Mu Bo's literary talents are brilliant, so powerful, but the other party is only a scholar at this time. Although an 18-year-old scholar is also very powerful, only those who have passed the Juran are eligible to enter the officialdom. This step alone may take 20 or 30 years, and those people really dare not gamble. However, the Mu family is indeed a rare marriage partner. Among other things, it is a great temptation to become in-laws with the Rongjun Palace, but everyone is looking at the twins under Mu Bowen. Kijia is a girl, she looks pretty good, her mother is gentle and amiable, and her sister is from Rongjun Palace, she should not be much different, and Mu Bosi, everyone likes him more, because although he is only 10 years old, he showed a very high military ability. It is said that he single-handedly picked out the Shu family's husbands who are over 10 years old and under 20 years old. The general's connections and resources in the army belong to him, and with his brother-in-law who controls half of Daki's troops as his backing, his future is limitless. That's why no one can see that Mu Bowen, who is just in time, gentle and hardy, is all staring at Mu Bosi, who has a bean body and a bean heart. Xu Huanyang couldn't help feeling guilty. She took her eldest son's hand and said, "I knew I shouldn't have pressured you to take the imperial examination 2 years ago. If you had obtained the status of Juran earlier, it wouldn't be so difficult now." Mu Bowen was very fortunate, and said with a smile, "Son, I would like to thank my mother for stopping me at that time." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 759. Mu Bowen grew up in a relatively simple environment. Although he has experienced poverty and war, he has always been protected by his father and sister. Although there are disputes and selfish bad people around him, most of them are friendly and help each other. The elders love and take care of the younger ones, and the younger ones are also filial to the elders. Although there are foolish and timid people, most are hard-working and brave people, not to mention, he has been dealing with the affairs of the nursery. Although there are many tragedies in the world, and there are good and bad children in the nursery, most of them have goodwill towards him and the Mu family, so Bowen has a simple heart, and he has resilience and arrogance in his bones, even if he is a child of an aristocratic family. He can also deal with it calmly in front of him, and he never feels that he is inferior to others. Those people think he is poor, but he is not angry. He has an older sister and younger sister, so he naturally knows the feeling that his family is worried about his daughter marrying an inhumane person, but he is also a little fortunate. Marriage is to be like them, and the one that suits you is the best. He hoped that his future wife and the Yu family would value him more than the relationship between the Mu family's family background and the Rongjun Palace. And these people in the capital saw that he saw the Mu family first, then his sister, and finally him. This also made Mu Bowen unwilling to marry them, so he was very grateful for their refusal, otherwise he would have to spend money. Time to convince father and mother. But Xu Huanyang blamed herself a little, hesitated and said, "Why don't you prepare for the country test after you go back?" Mu Bowen was taken aback, then smiled and said, "Mother, didn't you ask me to wait another 3 years? Everyone envies young talents, but Xu Huanyang knows that Mu Ziyu will be destroyed by Lin Feng, and her son knows that if Bowen has undergone a lot of hard work and has a firm heart, it is not impossible to be a young hero, but he is pure in heart, and he is still a good boy." Without tempering, he was pushed onto the political stage when he was too young. Even if he had his father and sister to take care of him, he would not be able to use his hands and feet in the officialdom. In the officialdom, one is not talented, good-natured, and tenacious enough to get in. Although Xu Huanyang is dull, she grew up in the family, heard a lot, saw a lot, and understood some things in the world. The first half of life in this world went smoothly, and there are not a few people who have a sudden change in temperament. Maybe she is not strong enough or confident enough in most things, but Xu Huanyang's heart is always the same when it comes to children. She doesn't want her son to suffer from these things. So he was forced to not take the provincial examination until he turned 20. But now Xu Huanyang is worried that her son won't be able to marry a good wife without his fame. Career and family. Career is important, but if you live in depression at home, your son will definitely not be happy. Seeing his mother's hesitation, Mu Yangling understood her thoughts, pulled her back and said, "Mother, my younger brother's appearance and talent are here, are you afraid that he won't be able to marry a good wife?" Most of the blog post is to look at the Mu family behind him. If there is a fly in the ointment, it is better to go back to the north to find out the truth. The key is that the younger brother likes the younger brother, and the other party also likes the younger brother. Xu Huanyang frowned, and said, "Although that's the case, I haven't found a suitable one in Baidi. There are many excellent ladies in Beijing, so I thought I could find one." "Mother, my brother is still young, just look for it slowly, don't you worry that your brother won't be able to marry a wife." Xu Huanyang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Your younger brother is 18, and the cubs were born when you were your age, which is not too young. If you hadn't sent a letter saying that your younger brother would not be allowed to marry early, I would have proposed to him 2 years ago." Hearing what his daughter said, Mu Shi turned his attention to the daughters of all the subordinates who were in the family. He touched his chin. Could it be that he wants his son to have a blind date with them when he returns? But the son has no strength to restrain the chicken, and he doesn't know who is bullying whom after the quarrel. Okay, since you can't find it in the capital, then go back to the north and look for it. Just like Aling said, isn't our son still worried about not being able to marry a wife? Mu Shi looked at his elegant and beautiful wife and smiled proudly. Said, back then, my family could marry a good wife without real estate, let alone him. Xu Wanyang's worried face turned red in an instant, and she gave him a reproachful look. What did she say in front of the children? Mu Yangling and Mu Bowen pursed their lips and watched cheerfully. Bosi and Kijia hadn't enlightened yet, but seeing their brothers and sisters having fun, they also followed suit. Hurry up and get out of the city, you have to stay at the inn at night. Mu Shi responded with a smile, stretched out his hand and squeezed Xu Wanyang's hand, turned and mounted the horse, lowered his head and gave Bo Wen a word, and said to Aling, take your mother back, don't stand here. Chi Heiran hurriedly got on his horse and personally sent his father-in-law out of the city. Maybe it was because he served as a soldier under Chi Heiran. Although Mu Shi usually puts on airs of his father-in-law, Chi Heiran also has a faint awe. Chi Heiran is much kinder. At this time, the two of them went out of the city side by side. They were worried about parting, and Mu Shi's tone was even better. He said to Chi Heiran, Aling's temper is sometimes a little impatient, but he has a good heart. Please bear with me in the future. Speaking of it, we are also parents. It's not good, she has to support the family since she was a child, and she got married early, and her mother didn't have time to teach her many things, so it is inevitable that she will be a little negligent in some things. If she does something wrong in the future, you should scold and reprimand her. If you don't listen, just write to me, and I will ask her mother to teach her a lesson. Chi Heiran hurriedly spoke for Mu Yangling, saying that she was fine everywhere, but her palms were a little sweaty, and she was suing her father-in-law about his wife. Chi Heiran asked himself that he didn't have the guts yet. But Mu Shi really said that? He thought, daughter has a quick temper, and son-in-law is even more hot-tempered. The character of reporting good news but not worrying, they are far away in the north, even if their daughter is wronged, they don't know. When a couple quarrels, there is always someone who can persuade them. Although they are far apart, there are homing pigeons, and the round trip is only 10 days. If they each play 50 boards and then comfort them, the couple will at least have time to relax. But Chi Heiran didn't understand his father-in-law's painstaking efforts. The more Mu Shi said that Mu Yangling was not good, the more he felt that Mu Yangling was good, and he kept praising her. The most beautiful woman in the world, no one else can match her. After sending Mu Shi away, Chi Heiran realized that his mouth was parched. He hurried back to the city, passed by their restaurant first, and reined in his horse to drink tea without thinking too much. As soon as he entered the door, the shopkeeper trotted out to greet him and said, "My lord, you are here. The Duke is in the second box. This servant will take you there. See what you want to eat at noon today. This servant will call the kitchen to start get ready." Chi Heiran said in surprise, "Zijin is here too? It's a coincidence." The shopkeeper said with a smile, "I thought you had an appointment with the Duke, but I didn't expect it to be a coincidence." The Duke came early in the morning, so he sat by the window and watched the scenery outside. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 760. Seeing Chi Heiran coming in, Fan Zijin raised his eyebrows slightly, and said with a smile, "Send your father-in-law away." Chi Heiran nodded, and sat down opposite him. "Why do you sit here when you have time?" Fan Zijin leaned on the back of the chair relaxedly. "Who else is more free than me in this capital now? Haven't you and your eldest cousin already decided to let me stay in Beijing? There is no errand to do, Why don't you just come out to drink tea and relax, relax? Chi Heiran rolled his eyes and said, I'll give you a chance to hide and relax. You don't want it? When my cousin gives birth and returns to Lingnan, there will be more things for you to do. Chi Heiran sat up slightly, stretched out his feet and kicked her gently. Kicking his feet, he said, I'm serious, this time I'm letting you stay in Beijing. Not only is Ho Biozeo giving birth, but more importantly, taking good care of your body. Dr. Wang said earlier that no matter how good the diet is, if you can't take a good rest, you're going to lose your health. None of the magic medicines work. Seeing that Fan Zijian lowered his eyes and did not speak, Chi Heiran's eyes darkened slightly, and he said in a low voice, you and elder brother are both older than me, but they are both in poor health now. Have you ever thought about how I will feel in 30 or 40 years? Fan Zijian looked at him strangely, and said, don't you still have a wife and children? You are the only family. Chi Heiran said seriously, the child always flies out, how can he stay with me? Aling is my wife, although we will be together until we grow old, but brothers are brothers, husband and wife are husband and wife, how can they be confused? I thought you would say that brothers are like brothers and women are like clothes. Brothers are indeed like siblings, other women are not as good as clothes, Chi Heiran said boldly. Fan Zijian leaned forward slightly, and asked with a strange expression, other women? What about Aling? Chi Heiran coughed lightly, and said, of course Aling is not another woman, isn't she my child's mother? Just try to be eyes or something. Oh, I saw it as an eyeball. Fan Zijian sat back in his chair and said sarcastically, it's a pity that she's not here now, no matter how nice you say, she won't be able to hear you. Chi Heiran blushed and said, I didn't mean to tell her. Fan Zijian snorted, held his tea and looked at the busy street outside. This street is the only way out of the city. It can be said that this road is the only way to go from the inner city to the outer city, and after passing here, go on. There are streets leading to various city gates. Back then, Fan Zijian opened this tea house not only to make money, but also to collect information. Among other things, as long as they opened a window, they could know which direction people in the inner city went out to. Fan Zijian was in a depressed mood, so he came to drink tea early. Today Chi Heiran sent Mu Shi out of the city and passed under his window. At this moment, he lit the window and said, there are 3 more generals who are leaving the city. Except Yuan Zhao, the other 2 are said to be. He is talking about marriage to the children in the family, so it will take 2 more days to marry the powerful officials in Beijing, and the second generation of Daki will also rise up. Yuan Zhao, Chi Heiran recalled the strange feeling from last night again, and said, the Yuan family was taken to the north by General Yuan. With Yuan Zhao's personality, he should be the first batch of people to leave the city. Although Fan Zijian also found it strange, he said, I don't know about that, but I'm an idler now. Chi Heiran stared at him, you have been in charge of the information before, so I don't believe you don't know, tell me quickly. Fan Zijian snorted twice, which whetted his appetite, and he consciously took revenge before going back. I guess Yuan Zhao wants to break away from General Yuan and make some achievements on his own. Chi Heiran stared in surprise, and said, General Yuan is the 2nd largest army in Daki after Chi's army, is he willing? It depends on how you look at it. Fan Zijian knocked on the table and said, brother is only in his 20s this year. It's the time when he is in the prime of life. There is no accident. 20 or 30 years later will also be the time when the spring and autumn are at their peak, and what Xiaobao has to do undoubtedly it is conservative, as long as you pay attention to maintenance, 20 years of peace and prosperity cannot be escaped. General Yuan looks getting older, but Lian Po is still not convinced at 70. 5 years is not a problem, but Yuan Zhao, Fan Zijian looked directly at Chi Heiran and said, don't forget, he is still 2 years older than elder brother. General Yuan can wait, but he can't. Chi Heiran rolled his eyes and said, this may not be a bad thing for us. That's right, if Yuan Zhao can be used, Yuan's army may not still exist after 10 or 20 years. Fan Zijin laughed and said, it would save people from bleeding to death. Didn't Yuan Zhao have several younger brothers? Fan Zijin said indifferently, they are nothing to be afraid of. They are more than courageous, but not resourceful. Moreover, if the Yuan family army can embezzle Yuan Zhao's military achievements, they will naturally embezzle them. Yuan Zhao is the eldest son and has grown up. If he can't take over Yuan Jiajin, his younger brothers are even more impossible. Qi Heiran smiled and said, then we can prevent the Yuan Jiajin's family from becoming bigger with almost nothing. It's not necessary to come. Fan Zijin snorted coldly, and said, General Yuan's contribution to the country is of course nothing to say, but it is not as good as you boast. It is too duplication of name, but it is distorted. General Yuan has always been Qi Heiran's idol. Even if Fan Zijin is his brother, he can't forgive him for speaking ill of his idol, so he glared and said, whoever says a general can't love his name, he can withstand the pressure of Emperor Jinjian and guard the border for 20 years, this deserves our admiration. Fan Zijin said lightly, I didn't say that he is not worthy of admiration, I just think he is not as good as you promote, at least he is biased in the word of justice, otherwise Yuan Zhao would not be staying in Beijing at this time. Looking for another way out, but suffering from my father's reputation, I can't tell the hardships. If it were you, would you like to be like this little bear? My son, will pave the way for him. You said the same thing, so why bother pushing General Yuan to the altar? Yuan Zhao doesn't ask him to be partial, but if he is more fair, will Yuan Zhao still abandon Yuan's army? Qi Heiran was silent. General Yuan is indeed a good general, a loyal minister, loyal to his duties, guarding the border for 20 years, even if the generals under him put a knife on his neck, he would not rebel. He is generous and loving to the people, restrains military discipline, and never disturbs the people and harms others. Not to mention that he will not be greedy for his subordinates' military merits, and even share the credits with his subordinates equally. But those were outsiders. General Yuan was very strict with his family, especially his sons. The sons of the Yuan family all joined the army at the age of 13 or 14. His superiors dare not be greedy, but General Yuan will take the initiative to distribute it to others. Among them, Yuan Zhao was the most aggrieved. Yuan Zhao is the eldest son of General Yuan. He was the first to join the army. He joined the army at the age of 12. Before Qi Heiran appeared, he had always been regarded as the most talented young man in military affairs, and Qi Ziyuan would have shot back. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 761. When Yuan Zhao joined the army, General Yuan had just been promoted to a general. At that time, the Yuan family army had not yet been established, and his reputation was not obvious. General Yuan arranged for him to be a soldier under his command. He went to battle and killed the enemy less than a year after he joined the army. He beheaded the enemy with him. It is more than enough to be promoted to the general banner with his military achievements at the top level, but General Yuan gave his military achievements to his comrades who went to battle with him on the grounds that he was too young to join the army. Later, when Yuan Zhao turned 14, General Yuan kept him at the lower level on the grounds that he needed more training. Yuan Zhao was the youngest among the soldiers at the lower level, but he was the oldest. He served as a soldier for 4 years until at the age of 16, Qi Ziyuan, who was younger than him, emerged from the army and was promoted to a small banner under the intercession of the generals. In terms of the number of enemies killed, Qi Ziyuan may not be as good as Yuan Zhao, but he was promoted to general at the age of 18, and Yuan Zhao is just a school lieutenant. When Qi Ziyuan is able to lead the army independently, he has to obey orders from above. Qi Ziyuan is a general and Yuan Zhao is a soldier. It can be said that it was General Yuan who restricted Yuan Zhao's development. Qi Ziyuan has always had a keen eye. He respects General Yuan, so he naturally knows everything about him. When he was 2 years old and wanted to join the army, although he wanted to sharpen him more, he didn't restrict him too much, and even threw a 5th battalion for him to manage. As soon as he reached the age of 14, he was promoted to the captain first, and after regaining the Hanshong mansion, he did not shy away from asking for merit and promoting him to the rank of general. Before Yuan Zhao was 20 years old, General Yuan absolutely forbade people in the army to call him a little general, but before Qi Heiran joined the army, the people under Qi Ziyuan's subordinates called him a little general. There is also a comparison between the two. The world praises General Yuan for being strict with his son, but the emperor loves his younger brother too much. If it wasn't for General Yuan treating his other sons equally, everyone would doubt whether Yuan Zhao was General Yuan's son. Qi Ziyuan does not deny that General Yuan is a noble character, nor does he question his education method, because at present, in the situation where the second generation is generally domineering, the self-discipline of the Yuan family's children is indeed a beautiful landscape. Except for Yuan Zhao, the Yuan family's children are indeed not high-ranking officials, and they are not well known, but their self-discipline, justice, and love for the people are obvious to all. Not to mention Qi Heiran, even Qi Ziyuan sometimes thinks that those children are not doing it. Degree of doing. Just because he doesn't question it doesn't mean he agrees. Whether you say he's selfish or narrow-minded, anyway, he can't bear his younger brother and son to suffer like this. The kind of pain of being suppressed and unable to stand out, he has endured since he was a child. Know that depressed mood. Even if General Yuan suppressed it with good intentions, unlike Qi Feng, Qi Ziyuan would not agree, so when educating his younger brother and cousin, Qi Ziyuan warned them more than once that we cannot teach children to be ignorant, but it can suppress the development of children. To what extent they can do, to what extent they can grow, let them go freely. Influenced by Qi Ziyuan, even if Qi Heiran regards General Yuan as an idol, at this time he has to say that he is biased in educating children. Look, now Yuan Zhao can't stand that kind of depression, so he has to find another way out, right? Qi Heiran asked Fan Zijin furtively, then should we help Yuan Zhao? Speaking of which, I fought with his younger brother Wulang back then, so we still have some friendship. Fan Zijin glanced at him and said, Yuan Zhao was educated by General Yuan since he was a child, so even if he has the idea of finding another way out, I'm afraid it's not easy to bring it up. It's not bad for you to come forward as a pimp. Qi Heiran stared, I'm here to share the country's worries, how can I say it's pimping? Okay, go as soon as you want to go. The generals who enter the capital cannot stay for a long time. Even if the two generals want to get married for their children, they will leave the capital in a few days. Yuan Zhao is thin-skinned. They will stay for a long time. If you don't go, they will probably leave tomorrow, and the flames that have just risen after this person returns to the Northland one by one will probably be extinguished again. You have to add a handful of firewood to him. The flames turned into a big fire. Fan Zijin's eyes sparkled, and he said, as long as Yuan Zhao's fire burns well, and we encourage him to bring out his younger brothers, the torch can become a prairie fire, big fire, when the time comes. Daki will have a few more good generals who can lead troops to guard the border, and they will also disintegrate Yuan's army. Qi Heiran was so excited by what he said, he jumped up and said, then I'll add firewood. At this moment, Yuan Zhao was sitting blankly in the study, looking at the bleak courtyard outside. The bright yellow leaves on the trees were blown away by the wind and fell to the ground. Because no one cleaned it for a long time, the fallen leaves in the courtyard were piled up, layer after layer. This is the Yuan family's mansion in the capital city. It was bestowed by Emperor Jinjian from the previous dynasty. In the past, his grandmother, mother, and younger brothers lived here as hostages to ensure that his father and him would not rebel at the border. At that time, my father was full of heart to regain his homeland, and he had no doubts about it, because he firmly believed that as long as he was loyal to Zhou and the emperor, his family would be fine. But my father overestimated Emperor Jinjian, and also overestimated the great Zhou dynasty. His grandmother, mother, wife, and children were almost trapped in the capital. Fortunately, the current emperor helped him. Yuan Zhao admired Qi Ziyuan, and even worshipped him almost as if he looked up to him. Except for his wife, no one knew that he worshipped not his father, but the current Holy One. After all, his father was the object of worship of many people. Thinking of this, Yuan Zhao couldn't help laughing at himself. When he was young, many people compared him with Qi Ziyuan. For kung fu, bravery, and strategy, everyone around him said that Qi Ziyuan was not as good as him. If General Yuan didn't suppress him, he might have already walked ahead of Qi Ziyuan. But Yuan Zhao always knew clearly that he was inferior to Qi Ziyuan, not because of kung fu, bravery, and strategy, but because of courage and character. The Qi family was born as a civil servant, and Qi Ziyuan was suppressed by his father all the time. I heard that he was not even invited by his husband when he was a child, and he was said many times outside that he was not filial or fraternal, but he dared to ask his uncle to arrange a martial arts master for him. He dared to leave home alone to join the army, he dared to fight alone in the army without losing his heart. Yuan Zhao asked himself, can you do it? Do you dare to do it? The answer is no, because he has been hesitating and hesitating. 10 years have passed since he hesitated. He missed the best time of his life. At this time, he will miss another 10 years, and miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make meritorious deeds. After leaving Yuan's army, he could go farther and stand higher in any army. Yuan Zhao's complexion became more and more ugly, and his hands were clenched into fists. This is what Shen Qi, the military advisor who entered the door, saw. He is in a battle between heaven and man. If he can take that step, then he doesn't need to persuade him today. If he can't. Shen Qi stood aside, seeing Yuan Zhao's complexion was unpredictable, but he still hadn't made up his mind, so she sighed quietly, this cousin is good at everything, he is a good player in war, and he is not weak in communication, but he is hesitant on this matter. Shen Qi's sigh reached Yuan Zhao's ears, and Yuan Zhao was like a deflated ball, sitting on a chair with red eyes, his back bent a lot, almost dejected. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 762. The generals from all over the country have left one after another. Now there are 3 remaining families in Beijing, including you. Those 2 families are delayed because of their children's marriage. The emperor is merciful and doesn't care about it, but it's unreasonable for you to continue to stay, Yuan Shen. Well, you have to make up your mind, when shall we set off? Yuan Zhao lowered his eyes, and his clenched hands loosened and tightened. Seeing that he was so uncertain, Shen Qi stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder, sighing, cousin, that step is not as fast as you imagine. Difficult, my uncle is a first-rank general. According to the system, he can have 2 second-rank generals under his command, but there are several veterans who have followed uncle through birth and death. A place can get better development than Yuanjiajin. If you don't have the rights of the second rank in the army, and you have the reputation of the second rank, I won't say anything if you can control the Yuan family army after Uncle Rong retires, but Uncle will give your military merits to others, and those people will not read you, but Uncle. Now Uncle is very powerful in the Yuan family army, but once Uncle retires, you don't have the reputation of Uncle. Can you control Yuan family army? Shen Qi lowered her voice, and said, besides, my uncle is so famous, will he definitely control the Yuanjiajin in your hands in 100 years? He is not a vegetarian nowadays, he only cares about his friendship with his uncle, and he will not treat you like this during his tenure. What does Yuanjiajin do? But once uncle is away, there should be no family army with a different surname in Diqiyun. If you can't defend Yuan Jiajin, the generals and the people below will not think that it is uncle's fault, but will only think that you are not capable enough to bear the big responsibility. But cousin, are you really not capable enough to bear the great responsibility? Yuan Zhao clenched his fists instantly, and looked at Shen Qi with red eyes. What he longed for most in his life was to prove himself. Shen Qi patted him on the shoulder and said, "Go up and ask to see the Holy One. As long as you ask, it will be considered a demoted to another army. With your ability, it's much easier to get promoted back." Yuan Zhao gritted his teeth. "Okay, I'll go up the discount now." Just as Yuan Zhao picked up his pen, a sergeant rushed to report, "General, military advisor, King Rongjun is here to visit." Yuan Zhao was slightly surprised. Why did King Rong come? He came alone. The king of Rongjun only brought a servant, and his subordinates have already invited him to the flower hall to rest. Yuan Zhao and Shen Qi looked at each other and said, "Why doesn't he shy away? I'm from the Yuan family army, unlike Mu Shi who is his father-in-law." Yuan Zhao thought of this with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm suspicious, the emperor favors King Rong, not to mention that he only visited me as a general. Even if he visited all the generals, the emperor would not be suspicious. Let's go and see what's going on with King Rong. Is it because of Goro?" Yuan Wulang and Qi Heiran are about the same age, and it is said that they often fought when they were young. Shen Qi's eyes lit up, and she said in a low voice, "General, this is our chance." Yuan Zhao paused, then nodded slightly. Shen Qi breathed a sigh of relief. Yuan Zhao is not low in IQ or EQ, as long as he dares to take that step, the sky outside will not be low. Shen Qi smiled and followed Yuan Zhao out. Qi Heiran, who came to add firewood, saw Yuan Zhao's first words, "Brother Yuan, Yuan Wulang is also in the army now." Yuan Zhao was taken aback, then nodded, and said with a smile, "Wulang joined the army a few years ago. What office has he held now?" "Now he is serving as the general banner under the General Fang Shen." Qi Heiran frowned. "Goro is very brave. He has been in the army for many years. How can he be the general flag?" "In recent years, the Jin soldiers have always violated the border from time to time. In addition to the big battle the year before, he should have killed the enemy and made a lot of meritorious deeds." The tip of Yuan Zhao's tongue was bitter. His fifth younger brother did kill enemies and did a lot of meritorious deeds, but it was not recorded in his name. Compared with him, the fifth younger brother acted more unruly. Perhaps it was because he grew up with his grandmother and mother. Although his father has adoration, he lacks awe. His father can't understand some of his behaviors. He suppresses Goro more than he suppresses him, and he is determined to correct all those bad problems in Goro. But Yuan Zhao felt that young people, how could they not have a bit of vigor? However, in front of his father's authority, what he said has always been useless. Even though Yuan Zhao thought so, he didn't want to show any abnormalities in front of Qi Heiran. He stands alone, so. "You can't say that." Qi Heiran waved his hand and said, "In the army, it is necessary to unite and cooperate to make military achievements, but we must distinguish between the primary and secondary, otherwise those who should get more military achievements will not get them, and those who should have less will get more points. Yes, as time goes by, those who are treated poorly will inevitably feel resentment, and those who take too much will inevitably have unreasonable thoughts, which will spoil people's appetites. No matter whether Goro is your brother or not, you should treat them equally." Yuan Zhao felt that Qi Heiran's words really touched his heart. "Like my elder brother, the employer never avoids relatives. As long as Zijin and I make contributions, what is due to us will be ours," Qi Heiran said proudly. Yuan Zhao suddenly felt that Qi Heiran might not have such a high level of consciousness. He just came to show off. What should he do if he really wanted to beat someone up? Qi Heiran also coughed lightly, recalling the purpose of his trip again, so he put his arms around Yuan Zhao's shoulders, and sighed, but there is one thing that our brothers can't compare to you, our Chi family only has 3 brothers. There is also a shortage of people, unlike the 5 of you brothers, all of you are talented and capable, and you can stand on your own when you come out alone, but it is a pity that you are all in the UN family army. If you can come out to share the worries of the court, we don't know how much easier we will be. Yuan Zhao's heart was beating wildly, before he woke up from the shock of Qi Heiran's blatant denial of brother Qi Shaosheng. He was knocked out by the olive branch Qi Heiran handed over. Shen Qi at the side was also slightly surprised, and quickly gave Yuan Zhao a wink. Yuan Zhao pondered for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, "Prince Rongjun, I am willing to share the emperor's worries." The younger brother also pulled it out. Whenever the emperor sends you something, the minister and Wulang are willing to be ashamed to repay the emperor's kindness. Qi Heiran's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but patted the table and said, "Okay, Daki has a vast territory, and the border has always been unstable. Thousands of soldiers are easy to get, but generals are hard to find. Nowadays, there are still many border towns that are empty. The lieutenant led the troops to guard, just when we need you." Qi Heiran's eyes sparkled, and he didn't want to wait for a long time, so he immediately pulled Yuan Zhao and said, "Go, let's go to the palace immediately and tell brother Huang the good news." Neither Yuan Zhao nor Shen Qi expected that things would go smoothly like this, so they followed Qi Heiran into the palace in a daze. Fan Zijin didn't expect Qi Heiran to add this bundle of firewood so well. He directly led him to the palace. He was still drinking tea in the restaurant to entertain passers-by, and when he found out that Qi Heiran had led him to the palace, he only to find out that it was broken. It was agreed that he would inform the elder cousin where he was, but he hadn't had time to enter the palace yet. Fan Zijin was also only nervous for a short while, then leaned back on the recliner relaxedly, thinking, anyway, he is studying in Beijing, so it is understandable for him not to work. The next thing is to see the tacit understanding between Heiran and his big cousin.